Joining me on the road in the Catalyst studio at TyCon 2019 is Michael Coles. Welcome.
Wow, good to be here.
So
nice weather.
It is. It's not so bad in Jackson Hole, but this is what you're there for now, right? The beautiful snow.
We came here from Atlanta. It's been really cold.
It's cold without the beauty.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So I'd love to do an origin story on the Great American Cookie Company, which was not the first company that had the Great American name in it of yours.
No.
So let's go back to sort of the transition from the clothing industry and sort of coming out of that to the genesis, the first thoughts of getting into the cookie business.
So I had grown up in the clothing business and had my own company at just before we started the cookie company, which was called, coincidentally, the Great American Clothing Company. And I had 3 small kids, and I was really getting tired of the amount of traveling that I had to do in the clothing business. And the industry was taking a big shift. It was really, for a long time, based out of the South, which is how I wound up in Atlanta, but it was moving overseas to Asia. And instead of having to be gone 3 days a week, I would have to be gone like 3 weeks a month because you just couldn't afford to just keep coming back.
Right.
And so I decided that I was going to sell my interest in the clothing company to my partner. We'd only been in business about 14 or 15 months, and I was going to try to find something else to do. And so I went to my last clothing show, which was in San Diego, and I saw this long line of people in a mall because I had gone to the mall to buy snacks for my customers, and I had no idea what this line of people were doing. And I went down and stood in line like everybody else. And when I looked up, I realized it was a cookie store, and I had never seen a cookie store before. And so I got up to the counter and ordered a dozen cookies. I figured I'd take them back to the hotel for my customers, and the manager was on the counter, and I started asking him a bunch of questions, in which he, without any hesitation, gave me all the answers to: food costs, revenue, all these questions that I had. And then he realized we're holding up the line. Yeah. And instead of saying, I really got to get back to work, he said, I'll come out and I'll talk to you. So he did. He came out, we went and sat down at a table, and he answered the rest of my questions. And then, and basically I went, when he told me the food cost, I just couldn't even believe when he said the food cost was like, 20%. Because, in the clothing business, if we made 1%, we were doing really well. And so I left the mall, and I went to a grocery store, and I had a chocolate chip cookie recipe. I bought all the ingredients to make it because I had an oven in my hotel suite. And then I went next door to a drugstore, and I bought a postage scale, which I still have, to weigh out the ingredients so I could figure out what the food cost was. And lo and behold, he wasn't lying to me. He was telling me the truth. So I flew back a few days later, and when I got off the plane, Donna picked me up. My wife, Donna, picked me up at the airport. And on the way back, by the way, one other part of the story, on the way back, I picked up People magazine. This is back in the day when airlines used to let you have free magazines. And on the front cover, or maybe it was inside the magazine, there was a story about these young guys who had started this cookie company on the beach of Huntington Beach to earn money to go to college. And I'm thinking to myself, what is all this cookie stuff, So when I got off the plane, I said to Donna, I don't know what we're going to do with the rest of our lives and what I'm going to do for work. But while we're trying to figure it out, let's open a cookie store. And went back to my office the following day and told my partner I was going to sell my interest to him, and I was just going to go do something else with no intention of it ever being more than 1 or 2 cookie stores. So, you want the rest of the story now?
Well, I got some questions for you. So
Sure.
There's a lot of interesting things in there. So which side of the clothing industry were you on? Were you producing, or were you retailing, or were you distributing?
I started out retailing. I had a boss when I was 13 that gave me a job. I grew up as a very poor kid, and I had been working 3 different jobs. I still, when I went to work for him, wound up working one of the other jobs, not for myself, but that basically helped my family. And so I went from kind of retail, and then I went on the road as a sales rep, and then eventually started, my own manufacturing company.
And how did you finance the manufacturing company? Was that just through the success of the previous endeavors, or did you take investors?
Took no investors. We took it was pretty interesting. A friend of mine who had actually worked for me at one point we both had a lot of very loyal customers. We were pretty well known in the industry. We brought in a partner, a third partner that was a manufacturer. So he was basically putting up all the manufacturing. He was buying all the piece goods. And so basically all we had to really supply was travel expenses, find a place to locate. And we were, kind of a lean startup before there was such a thing as lean startup. And that's how we got going. We were very successful. I mean, not in huge numbers, but, you remember, this is 1977. I mean, we did 5 million our first year, but it was almost all private label. Major companies were, we were selling them fashion merchandise and with either their label or our label. We got written up in a bunch of magazines. But my partner, after we had this success, honestly, he just wanted to go a different way, which was to do no more unbranded merchandise. He wanted to hire a sales force. We had done all this, just the two of us.
Right.
And so it was very profitable. And so that on top of the fact I didn't want to travel as much,
right,
I decided to get out.
So when you're deciding to get out of the industry, how much of it was the industry and how much of it was partner? Had the clothing industry still been strong, do you think you would have stayed in it and gone with a different partner? Or
probably, it's like one of those things. You never know which one had more pressure on you. I knew I didn't want to travel as much. My end of the business would have required me to go to Asia. But I think if I had had a better relationship with my partner, and by the way, he had a 2/3 interest in the business. I had a third. Because the other partner was close to him. So it was not going to be my decision about what we did going forward. I just knew it wasn't going to work. And so I would say that's what pushed me over the top, was knowing that if I stayed in, we were going to go in a direction that I thought would put us out of business in a year. And I was right.
Yeah, that was my next question. Yeah. So it did happen.
Yeah, I left the company, and I'd been in the cookie business about a year, and they wound up closing.
Right. And you being entrepreneurial, is that just so you started the company, and then as you're telling the story of moving on to the cookie company, it's immediately, what's the next business I'm going to start? Is that just the way it is for you?
Well, my old boss Irving, when I was working for him in the clothing business, he had taken a big risk to open this store. And I once asked him, I said, why did you decide to go out on your own instead of just working for somebody? And he said, well, everybody that ever wanted to hire me wanted to pay me what I was worth, and I didn't want to work for that little. And that's kind of my story. I never interviewed very well, and I never really could find kind of the opportunities that I wanted to pursue. And I knew the only way that I would have the kind of life I wanted was to be in my own business. So always was taking a bunch of risks here and there, but seems to have worked out.
The cookie shop that you landed upon when you were buying them for your staff, was that a one-off, do you remember, or a small chain or a chain?
I don't remember. I think it was a small chain. I think it was called, I'm sure they spent a fortune in a marketing firm to come up with the name. It was called the Cookie Store. So I think they probably wound up with about 30 or 40 stores.
That's something.
There were 3 major chains when we started. One had almost 100 stores. 2 had almost 50 stores. And by the time we had 100 stores, they were out of business.
Why?
They weren't retailers. They were mostly out of the bakery industry. That's the reason we did as well as we did. That's why we became the largest franchisor of cookie stores in the United States, because we didn't know the first damn thing about selling bakery products or food or anything else. We had a store that was being merchandised just as well. We could have had shirts on the counter as well as cookies. Lots of merchandise, very energetic people behind the counter, upselling. Oh, by the way, if you buy that one cookie, if you buy 6, we'll give you 1 free. So a lot of suggestive selling. You just don't find that in the bakery industry. So worked to our advantage.
And what was the partner situation? Did you take any? Did the previous experience put partners away for you forever, or what? How was that rolled?
So we first of all, as I said, I mean, the company would not have been a predictable success. My partner and I did have a partner. We were both 50-50 partners. We each put up $4,000, a total of $8,000 to start the company. We borrowed $25,000 from a bank. They made us put up all of our personal assets, including our clothing. Everything we owned went on the line for that $25,000. And, the company we had a beg to go get our first lease. We finally got it. It was $25,000 a year at a mall in Atlanta called Perimeter Mall. We had to sign a 10-year lease. We had to personally guarantee it. It's $250,000 if the company failed. And the guy that gave us the break, a guy named Jeff Weil, basically tried to do everything he could to talk us out of it because he said, you'll never sell enough cookies to pay the rent, and I don't want to be responsible for you losing everything. But we finally convinced him to give us the space. And then anyone that's ever been to a Great American Cookie Store, and you hear the fact we started the company with $8,000, we grew it to hundreds of stores nationwide with sales over $100 million. Everybody would assume it must have just gone smooth from the very first day. So let me tell your listeners the story. So our very first day, we show up at the mall at 7:30 in the morning to get everything prepared. We had no money for marketing. And so we printed up flyers and passed them out around the surrounding neighborhoods around the mall. And then we also passed them out to mall employees. And the hook was that from 9 in the morning on June 29th, we would give away free cookies until 12 noon. And we figured if we could get people to come to the mall, taste our product, they would come back and buy it. So we show up there at 7:30 in the morning. By about 8:30, we put that first batch of 300 cookies in the oven. It was a big revolving oven. It had like a Ferris wheel in the center of it with a glass front, so you could actually watch the cookies baking. When we put that first batch in at about 8:30, we looked down in the mall, and there were, I have no idea, but well over 150 people were out in the mall, waiting for free cookies. We got really excited because we didn't even know for free cookies if anybody would show up. And so we put that first batch of cookies in, and people were pressed up against the gate where they could see the window where the cookies were baking. They went round and round. They almost looked like ice cream scoops sitting on the trays. They eventually start to flatten out. They go from white to tan. And just at the moment when they were done, when the bell went off, those cookies had flattened out, reached the most beautiful golden brown color you've ever seen. There were cracks in the cookies. Steam was coming out. People out in the mall heard the bell. They knew that any moment now they were going to get these golden brown, delicious cookie. They were salivating, waiting to get those cookies. And inside the store, all the employees of the store, which consisted of my wife, Donna, my partner, Arthur, and his wife, Susan, their son, Billy, and my mother, Lee, we had no paid employees because we couldn't afford them. We decided in this great symbolic gesture, we would open up the oven door and with all hands on deck, pull that oven door open and begin our business, which we were so excited to start. And so we did. We opened up the oven door and we peered inside the oven at these magnificent golden brown chocolate chip cookies sitting on their trays at 350 degrees. And it was exactly at that moment we realized we had no pot holders. We had no way to get the cookies out of the oven. We didn't have any rags in the store. We didn't have napkins in the store. Anyway, people out in the mall have no idea what's going on. They're just watching the cookies go round and round, going from golden brown to much darker shade of brown, eventually catching on fire on the trays.
Gosh.
Smoke poured out of our oven. We were on a combined air conditioning system with Park Lane Hosiery. People were running out of Park Lane Hosiery screaming. They thought the mall was on fire. The fire department came, and I remember standing behind the counter of the store, and I saw the mall manager, Jeff Weil, coming towards the store, and all he asked was one question: is this what it's going to be like every day, guys? And the truth is, we threw this big business plan at him one more time, but it was a really scary moment because the truth is we realized how much we didn't know about the business.
That puts there's no such thing as bad publicity to the.
Well, you're right, because the next day when we did the same thing, we handed out flyers again, kind of with a oops across the top that just said we'll do this again tomorrow. We probably had 300 or 400 people show up. I'm sure they all were there to see, what are you guys going to forget today?
You should have done BYOB, bring your own baker's mitt, to help us take the cookies out. So how long did you go before you hired your first employee?
Well, we needed to do $12,000 worth of business that first 30 days to break even. In our first 30 days, we did over $30,000 worth of business. And so we hired people almost immediately within a few days. We started doing, like $1,000 a day. We became the highest revenue cookie company in America almost overnight. And instead of having to go and beg for locations like we had for Perimeter Mall, in fact, we have shopping mall developers offering us locations all over the country. We had people applying for franchises, even though we weren't selling franchises. Just about everything you would think would be in place for the company to succeed seemed to be there. Well, about 6 weeks after we started the company, I woke up in Northside Hospital, which is in Atlanta, with 2 doctors standing over my bed telling me that I was going to live, but I had been involved in a near-fatal motorcycle accident. I'd probably never walk normally again. I would always either need canes or crutches, but considering the alternative not waking up at all, I thought that was okay. And so I started going through a rehab program that doctors had subscribed. But about 9 months after my accident, I had an incident with my daughter, Taryn, who was 3 years old at the time, that virtually changed my physical life and my business life forever. She asked me if I would race her to the mailbox on the way up to get mail. We lived on a kind of a country road with a pretty steep driveway. I was on 2 canes at the time. I figured even on 2 canes, I could beat this little kid up the driveway. And I took off to run, and the pain was excruciating. And she immediately saw that I couldn't do it. So she started making excuses to me like, Daddy, I'm really tired. I actually really don't feel like running, as I began to make excuses to her. And it was devastating because it was really the first time since my accident that I realized that I was disabled. And so we did make it to the driveway, up the driveway, get the mail, came back in. I told my wife, Donna, I can't live like this. I've got to try to get better. Because as I said, it was the first time since my accident that I realized I was disabled, but not so much disabled in my legs, disabled in my mind. It was the very first time in my life that anybody had told me what my limits were, and I believed them because I was living in the comfort zone. I can tell you today, at 33, learning how to walk again really hurts. And so, again, I grew up as a poor kid, and every time someone would tell me what I was not going to be capable of doing, it just gave me an incentive to prove them wrong. But this was very different. And so I started a self-styled rehabilitation program that eventually took me from a stationary bike to a regular bike. I started riding longer and longer distances around my house. And at the same time we built the cookie company to its national success, I not only learned to walk again, but set 3 world records riding coast to coast on a bicycle. And proud to say, sitting here, that both those records still stand.
So when you decided to go on your own, using your sort of entrepreneurial DNA, we'll say, to take control of your own rehabilitation, were you looking at what they prescribed and doing your own thing, or doing just working harder, or what was your mindset?
Well, I would say that in today's rehab, the world's very different than when I was 33 and this happened. When I was 33, you might find a gym in Atlanta, a gym. You didn't see people running. You didn't see people riding bikes. You didn't see any of that. At 33 years old, my doctors figured that being on a cane, that was pretty good. You're not going to do, you're 33, your life is over. It was just a different world. I would say that my rehab program that I just designed is probably the way people would rehab today. So I went back. I had been a power lifter in my former life. And so I went, instead of light weights, high repetitions, I went to heavy weights, low repetitions, try to build bulk back up on my legs. I had been involved in karate, so I started doing a lot more flexibility training. I was really just trying to push the envelope in a way that I hadn't before. And lo and behold, I started making tremendous progress. I was having to go 40 minutes to the hospital to get into a tub, to get the people to help me bend my legs. And instead, Don and I bought a hot tub, and she would get in it with me and, help bend my legs. And so it was definitely, self-styled, but I would say that's probably pretty normal today. And it took a year and a half. Before I was able to get on a bike and ride more than a couple of miles on a bike. It took probably a year and a half to 2 years.
And how much did that disrupt your participation in the business? Was your partner able to pick up the slack, or how did that go?
No, my partner was, for at least for a year, was still running his other business because we couldn't afford to take any money out. But the thing that's so great about what happened to me is that what went from a business that I expected to have 1 or 2 stores, and then I was going to pursue other opportunities, the accident stopped me from pursuing anything else. So I had to focus on the cookie business. And by the time I was walking, or I guess riding my bike, we had about 25 stores. We were doing really well. And I thought to myself, well, maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. And so it's something that could have been a real tragedy, turned out to be a real triumph. And we focused on the business and we built a terrific company.
So one of the things we sort of glossed over are the cookies themselves. I believe in the power of merchandising for sure, but was this magic recipe you had in the hotel room the same one you used?
No.
How did the product evolve?
So my partner and I had known each other for a long time on various sides of the business. And his wife, Susan, always made chocolate chip cookies to serve customers. And I was never, at one point I was her customer. That was their customer. And I went to a show and had those cookies and always remembered them because they were just unbelievable. So when he decided to go into the cookie business, unbeknownst to me, and we found out almost serendipitously that we were both working on the idea of going into the cookie business. That's why we decided to do it together. And I immediately tossed my mother's recipe away because it didn't even compare to Susan's great grandmother's recipe.
Wonderful. So can you give us a couple, we have a lot of young entrepreneurs who listen, a lot of people who are in the startup founding phases now. Can you give us or give them some advice?
Well, I was very fortunate back in the day when I was a salesman on the road. I won a big sales contest for my company, and my company flew me home from New York to Detroit first class, and they upgraded me because I had won this contest. And I was sitting next to a guy on the plane who was first time I'd ever seen a Rolex watch up close, and we had a nice conversation as we were getting ready to land. I looked at him, and by the way, this guy would not be on a commercial plane today. He would have been on a private plane. I'm sure I never would have had the opportunity to meet him. But as we were getting ready to land, I looked at him and asked the obvious question, which is, what advice would you give a young guy like me that's just starting out in the business world? And he didn't even hesitate. He just looked at me and he said, take risks if you want to be successful, and do it as early as you possibly can. Because the older you get, life gets more complicated and risk becomes harder and harder to do. And I thought about that. I was 22, and I literally got off the plane, went back to my home and called my boss, and there was a promotion that was available. I was living in Western Michigan in Grand Rapids, and the city of Detroit had opened up. And this is back in the heyday of Detroit. And I called him up and said, you don't have to look for another salesman. I want the territory. I'll move to Detroit. And his words were, you're too young, slow down, don't get ahead of yourself. And I said, if you don't give me the territory, I'm telling you now, this was September. I said, if you don't give me the territory, I'm leaving in January. It was the biggest risk. But I had really heard what this guy said to me. I felt I was a good salesman. I felt I could land on my feet. And I figured somebody wouldn't care about my age. They would just look at my background. And so he didn't take me serious. He never hired another salesman, even though I sent him a letter in November to say, I hope whoever you've hired, let him come up to my house and pick up my samples. And anyway, we stayed great friends after that. I did move to Detroit, had the whole state of Michigan, wound up building an incredible business, hired 3 salesmen to work for me in the state, eventually got promoted and moved to Atlanta. And, it was a fast track. But like I said, I stayed in touch with him. And every time one of my customers would run a full page ad on my new, the line that I was selling, I would send him a copy of it and say, "You were right. I'll never make it in Detroit." So.
And I'm assuming you probably sent the doctors a few photos of your world records as
No,
well.
I never did, because I think that they were I never resented what the doctors said, because I really felt like it was just based on the time when things happened. But, I guess the other advice I would just say to anybody is that there's really never a good time to go in business. Anybody that will tell you, I'm waiting for the right opportunity at the right time, there is no good time. I mean, we started the cookie company when interest rates were 20%, and that stores were opening as fast as they were closing. And we basically, again, had no experience at all. We should never have succeeded. But, that first day, if you think about it, a $3 set, with all that planning that we did around the cookie business, a $3 set of potholders could have put us out of business that day. And being in business, especially for young entrepreneurs, it's not about getting knocked down. It's about staying down. And it's not about dealing with what you plan for. It's about dealing with the unexpected, because success and failure are just measured with how you deal with those things that come up that you had no idea were going to come. And they're going to happen. We dealt with plenty of pothole stories in the cookie company. I dealt with plenty of them at Caribou. I've dealt with plenty of them in the banking business. But, if you take those problems and figure out how to resolve them, you can succeed.
Wonderful. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And for those of you interested in learning more, Michael Coles has a book, Time to Get Tough. And I have it. I own it. Tagline is How Cookies, Coffee, and a Crash Led to Successful Business and Life. Full of wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.